Kia ora koutou katoa. Welcome everyone. My name's James Walker. I'm the chair of Mindful Fashion New Zealand, and I pop up from time to time, and today is one of those occasions where I have popped. So thank you all for joining us. I just quickly want to introduce you to the Mindful Fashion colleagues on the Zoom. And we've got Greg Hagan joining us from Christchurch with those sweet earbuds, and Emily Miller-Sharma, who many of you will know, Ruby, and Jacinta Fitzgerald as well. Now, just in case you haven't caught up on the news, the exciting news is that Jacinta has actually stepped down off the board to take an even more prestigious position, which is as our first program director. And this is a massive milestone for Mindful Fashion because it means we have an incredibly talented and able person who is there a number of days a week driving forward the Mindful Fashion agenda. And so we're really ramping up thanks to Jacinta. So welcome aboard in front of other people, Jacinta. I've said that to you so many times, but you're doing a great job after 3 weeks. Keep it up. So today's call is actually about talking to you about the Mindful Fashion New Zealand Code of Conduct and Charter. So thank you for joining us for this conversation. And also I'm going to say thank you to those people in the future who will join us when they're watching the recording. So hello, the future. So at the AGM, we set out the Mindful Fashion New Zealand strategy, which was well supported by our members. And we kind of said that we exist because we believe in a future for New Zealand clothing and textile industry that is inclusive, sustainable, and successful. And our mission is, which is there on this beautiful slide, Jacinta's so good at slides. Our mission is to unite the New Zealand clothing and textile industry to create an innovative, full circle, and thriving future. So what do? It says right there, we advocate for the industry to New Zealanders and our stakeholders. We facilitate collaborative solutions and collective action, and we support innovation to ensure a sustainable industry into the future. So what does this mean about the code and the charter? So the code and the charter have been designed as our foundational documents for members. They represent your business's commitment to our industry's shared mission, which we've just discussed. So to be a member, you're expected to adopt the code of conduct in your business and agree to the charter. And this applies to brands, fabric agents, designers, and CMTs. Everyone who's entitled to a member will be asked to sign those documents. And signing those documents is actually what sets Mindful Fashion members apart. It's actually what makes us special. It's the commitment, our shared commitment to that vision and that mission in that top box. So the code, it really sets out baseline standards and practices for member businesses to adopt. We hope to have made it really easy for you by having written this code for you based on best practice. And we will provide resources along the way to help this be implemented across the range of businesses that are part of Mindful Fashion. The charter is actually a more aspirational document about how we capture that vision and mission and kind of points to where we're heading. So I've come up with a metaphor. If the code is the ground floor that everyone comes in on, the charter is the penthouse for which we all aspire to be in. So there you go. If you remember one thing, remember that. The flip side, of course, is that businesses that are not committed to ethical and sustainable practices, they will not join Mindful Fashion. They will not sign the code. They will not sign the charter. And so that gives us this mandate to work on your behalf to advocate for members who care about these issues. Jacinta's going to talk about these documents in more detail, but that is the high-level version and a metaphor. So some of you may recall when Mindful Fashion was first launched, we introduced a partnership agreement. And based on our learnings since then, feedback from a range of members, and our overall strategic direction, we decided to move away from that model. So very simply, in short, for those who have been with us since the beginning, 18 months or so ago, the code and the charter are now replacing the partnership agreement. If you've joined us more recently or you're joining us from the future, then that won't matter because this is all you'll know, the code and the charter. The main change here is that the code is adopted and implemented by each member as a business, whereas a partnership agreement was an agreement between Mindful Fashion members and their suppliers who are not members, and also with Mindful Fashion itself being a party to those agreements. So with this code now in place, we are setting a shared understanding of ethical and sustainable practice among our members because each business adopts it and owns that code. However, just to be very clear, we do not see Mindful Fashion at this stage playing a role as monitors of compliance with the code through the supply chain. Why? Well, there's two reasons for that. Firstly, we're not currently resourced or equipped to play that role, frankly speaking. And secondly, strategically, as is represented here, we've made a decision to be positive and constructive enablers of change and encourage all businesses in the supply chain to strive for ongoing improvement. That role of being an enabler and an inspirer doesn't sit comfortably alongside a compliance and monitoring role. That being said, we understand to some members that verification against these codes is important to them. And there are options for how we can look at doing this in the future, which is something Jacinta will also touch on as well. So again, thank you for your time today. Those are the introductory remarks about what we've been brought together. Thank you again for joining us. We will have questions at the end. And as Jacinta said, we're trying to keep this to 30 minutes so we can all go and chair for Mr. Biden. Jacinta.
Kia ora tātou. Thank you, James. So as James has said, at Mindful Fashion, we've evolved our foundational documents for members from the partnership agreement to a charter which outlines our guiding principles as an organisation and a code of conduct which really defines responsible business standards that members are expected to follow. So these are the building blocks which basically represent our shared commitment towards ethical and sustainable practice. I'm going to share these with you all in the, like both of these documents in the coming days via email, but I really wanted to run through them now with you at a higher level to give you an overview of what they mean for you as a business, as a member of Mindful Fashion. So our charter, which hopefully has come up on your screen there, really outlines our guiding principles as an organisation. So you can see them on the slide here. They show our vision for the future and what we're working towards. So really our North Star, or the penthouse perhaps. So built around respect, embracing New Zealand's cultural values and diversity, ethical business practices, being open and transparent, and seeking to make continuous improvement on sustainable practices. Our code of conduct is a core set of business standards. These standards are virtually identical to those that were in the original partnership agreement, and they really outline what is basically legal requirements for a business that's operating today. Things like paying at least the minimum wage, having health and safety procedures in place that meet legal standards. What's changed here is that it is a code that all members sign and adopt for their own businesses, whether they be a brand, a manufacturer, a CMT, a fabric supplier, anywhere in the supply chain. By signing the code of conduct, members agree to work towards meeting these standards in their own businesses and also to introduce the code to their suppliers and subcontractors to sign. What's different about this from the partnership agreement is that the code is not an agreement, as James said, between Mindful Fashion and members or makers. All businesses in the supply chain can be part of Mindful Fashion. We want all businesses in the supply chain to be part of Mindful Fashion, and all businesses that are part of our organisation commit to this code. So it's a shared commitment. The code sets the standard for all members, regardless of what type of business they are. What the code does do is put the responsibility onto the business that adopts it to maintain the standards and to undertake due diligence. Mindful Fashion's role is to provide tools and guidance to help members to do this and to implement the code over time. So this really leads me to our expectations of members, which you would have seen on the previous slide, and James has also talked about. To be a member, you're expected to adopt the code of conduct in your business within the first year of membership and to agree to the guiding principles as outlined in our charter. This is what sets us apart, our shared commitment to this mission. Along with this, our members are also expected, as has been happening already, to share their local supplier details with us. This is so that we can share out the mahi of introducing Mindful Fashion and the code to our local CMTs and suppliers, as we've been doing, to get them on board with us and so that they only need to sign the code once from one member, regardless of how many members that they work with. To help us in our strategic work to be positive and constructive enablers of change, we also want to be asking members, we also plan to ask members to complete a really short survey each year on their sustainability journey and progress. We haven't developed this yet. It's part of our education and sustainability working group, and we are going to be working on this with members. So watch this space, but that is another expectation of members that you will see that was outlined in the earlier slide. Arriving at this point involved quite a process. So this new foundational structure, the code, the charter, and the expectations of our members, this has been quite a journey for us as an organisation, and it's involved a lot of input from many different stakeholders. In particular, with redesigning our code of conduct, we went through a really comprehensive review of the existing partnership agreement. And I want to hand over to Greg, who James introduced a bit earlier, but for those that have jumped on after that, Greg Hagan from Albion Clothing in Christchurch is also on our board. I want to hand over to Greg, who was part of that review process, to talk through a little bit about what we went through and why we came to settle on this code of conduct like we did. And then once Greg's finished, I'll talk a bit more about due diligence and verification of the code. So over to you, Greg.
Thanks, Jacinta, and hi, everybody. Firstly, apologise if you hear a lot of banging and crashing. I've got some builders next door. So, yeah, so how did we kind of arrive at the current code? I suppose, as you can imagine, discussing something like this with a group of people, you get a lot of different opinions, and it was a little bit difficult to arrive at a consensus. So I think it was really important, as James and Jacinta mentioned, that we recognised from the start this had to be a journey that we're on. So we have some very aspirational goals right at the penthouse level, and we have some kind of onboarding kind of standards, I suppose, in the code. And when I say onboarding, we're trying to make the code, wanted to make the code something that could be upheld and managed easily. So something that's achievable by everyday business in New Zealand, but also have some kind of things that are kind of asking us to step up, I suppose. So, I suppose in part of that analysis was recognising that there's quite a few things in the code that are basically employment law. They fall under what our obligations are as employers in New Zealand. And if we're offshoring, there would be probably a lot more investigation required. And we're trying to recognise that there's an obligation under New Zealand law to adhere to, like, paying the minimum wage, for example. And that we, as a group, Mindful Fashion, we didn't want to be chasing people down to make sure they're adhering to employment law, but we wanted to make sure there's an expectation on members that they felt obliged to do that. And I suppose framing all this up was, like James mentioned, that we don't really at the moment have the resource in Mindful Fashion to be walking around every member's business and trying to make them, like, force them with their arm up their back, do something that they don't want to do. So it's about entry level kind of into a code that's also has some stretch goals, if you like, something that's aspirational, but is achievable, and we're putting the power in the hands of the members to be able to achieve that. Yeah. I suppose the other thing that we were trying to consider was that, like in the business that I'm involved in, we have suppliers that give us fabric, for example. They won't disclose in-depth detail into their supply chain because that's their, as they call it, their IP. So there's a real reluctance for them to be able to cough up that information. And it meant that as a CMT, I couldn't really kind of guarantee that where some of those materials were coming from, but I'm taking other people's word for it. So we're trying to come up with a code that is, you know, there's a responsibility on me as the CMT to understand where my materials come from, but also allow for the fact that maybe I don't get full disclosure from my supplier. So there's like this a responsibility to act and adhere to the code and to try and hold your own suppliers to account. So we are trying as CMTs or as members of Mindful Fashion to put a weight of compliance on the member as opposed to driving it from an organisational level. And I think personally from my experience in dealing with brands that have been offshoring and they've come into Albion and said, here's our kind of compliance document, we want you to sign up to this code. There's been things like, one example was that I was going to have to sign up to have an illuminated exit sign in the building, but I have exit signs that comply with the New Zealand kind of laws and the Christchurch Council laws about building compliance and exit signs. So I didn't want to feel forced into complying to something that was kind of bespoke almost to a brand because they want it to happen for their offshoring suppliers, but onshore in New Zealand, I'm complying with national law and local law. And so, you know, there needs to be a little bit of give and take, if that makes sense. So I think that's probably all my notes, but that's pretty much where we came to as a group of CMTs. So just to recap, something that allows us to get involved without people running and hiding from it because it's too hard and diving too deeply into their business, but also is aspirational and takes us on the journey to, as James said, the penthouse, where hopefully we will, as we gain trust in each other and in our suppliers over the course of the next few years, we'll be able to get more visibility and kind of maybe lift the standard internally in New Zealand.
Thanks, Greg. So I guess now I just wanted to touch on due diligence and verification because that is something that has come up. So we know that codes of conduct are an important tool in the apparel industry globally, and they're expected by other businesses, non-profits, some consumers. And we know that due diligence is also important to ensure a robust system. So due diligence is a process which businesses undertake to identify, prevent, mitigate, and account for addressing their own risks and impacts in their business. In the case of clothing supply chains, it's really looking at if a business is meeting its obligations under a code of conduct. And traditionally, this has been done with audits in the clothing industry to verify compliance. However, we know that these are ineffective at both detecting issues and making positive change. That is a global, there's global awareness about that challenge. So with Mindful Fashion from the outset, we said that verification was something we wanted to work towards, but we weren't certain about what that would actually look like. And as James said earlier, we don't see Mindful Fashion's role at this point as monitors of compliance with our code, but we know that some form of verification is important for many of our members. Globally, due diligence really is being undertaken with a risk-based approach. And so what we would do for our members and against our code of conduct would be taking that same approach, assessing the risk and then working towards how can we address what risk there might be. So there's no one size fits all really for this. First and foremost though, what we really would need to understand is what need verifying against our code of conduct would be meeting for our members in order to determine the best way to meet that need, if that makes sense. So with that in mind, we've developed a simple roadmap showing what one pathway to an independent type of verification against our code could look like. But I really want to stress that this is one approach and that there are many other ways that we could undertake this. And again, it's going to come down to the needs of members, the resources that we have available, and the risk that we are wanting to address. So you'll see a roadmap there outlined on your screen. Over the course of the last year and a half, we've been working with the partnership agreement, we've done quite a lot of work into what aligning our standards with international best practice would look like. And in this case, in the case of the roadmap I've got outlined here, it's against the SA 8000 standard. So we've engaged with them, we've had quotes back, we've gone through quite a process on mapping out what some sort of verification system could look like. And as you can see, the process would be quite a long one. We know from our experience with introducing the partnership agreement to our local CMTs, that actually it takes a long time to get these things happening. So to develop a process with SAI, for example, we see that taking between 18 to 24 plus months. That is to get the independent verification, to align our process with theirs, to develop the training and tools required, and then to implement the system. There are two main costs involved in this. One would be actually setting the program up, and the other would be the independent assessments or verifications against the program. So just to give you an idea of what that might look like, setting the program up would probably cost in the vicinity of $20,000, and then to undertake 20 independent assessments in the vicinity of $15,000, which we would see needing to be done multiple times. So 20 would be maybe in 1 year, but the next year we would need to do more. So as we've talked about at this point, we're not really resourced to do this work. So what we're really wanting to explain here is, like, yes, there is a process that can be undertaken. We've identified one pathway to that. There are multiple other ways that this could be achieved. What we really need to do at this point is understand if this is something that members are wanting, and if it's something that members are wanting, what is actually the need that it's addressing? Is, you know, what's the question we need to answer, because is independent verification the right answer for the question? So based on that, we plan to consult with our members, like with you guys, over the next few months to really understand that, to understand the need for verification, and then to work out what the right answer might be. So if anyone's got any thoughts on that, please feel free to email me or call me. I'm really happy to talk about it. We're all on this journey together. But now I think we can do some Q&A. And I will stop sharing my screen so we can see each other. Here we go. Has anyone got any questions? I love it.
It's Sandy.
Right.
I guess my biggest question, and it's been one that I've kind of been grappling with for a long time, because the majority, so when we're doing things like sourcing fabrics, and we do source our fabrics offshore, we do source some onshore as well, but the majority of our fabrics do come offshore. And, you know, I've had lots of discussions with our offshore supplier around, you know, their standards and, you know, their treatment of their people. And we use a lot of cotton in our manufacture, and we all know all the issues around cotton and dyeing and just all of those things. And I guess one of the things that I felt like kept coming back to me, and I've never been to our supplier, and it is a reputable one, but I've never actually physically been there. One of the things that kept coming back to me was, oh, look, it's fine. No, of course we don't use any form of, you know, they didn't use the word slave, but like people who are virtually having to work for that organization to create the fabrics. And I just felt like it was very much just telling me what I wanted to hear, as opposed to having proof that it was real and sound information. So how do we deal with that? Because it is like a serious concern for me, to make sure that we aren't adding to any problems in the world around that sort of fabric creation.
So I'm happy to have a go at answering that. And then if Emily or if anyone in the Ruby team or people that have done some of this as well already want to step in, please do. So I guess I'd bring that back to our expectations of members, is that introducing the code to your suppliers and getting them to sign it as an expectation is the first step in that process. And really, I mean, I can go into much more detail about the process that you probably need to follow to do due diligence on that factory. But part of what I see our role as Mindful Fashion is providing that as a guidance document to our members of how to do that with their suppliers. So following up on them with any other audits or any standards that they meet, finding out about other things that they've got going on, like those are all parts of the stages in that process for you to do your due diligence against them. But I would say first and foremost, against our code of conduct, it's introducing that to your suppliers and getting them to sign it.
I guess I'm just worried they'll sign it.
Yeah, but I think it's the first step because it's showing the commitment, and then once you've got that in place, then there are more steps to take.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
Does anyone want to add anything to that?
So what I would say is that there are so many suppliers that exist now that are completing reputable independent verifications, that if your supplier, and it's annoying to find new suppliers, but if your supplier is happy to sign the code of conduct but is not happy to put in place any type of timeline to independently verify what they're verbally saying to you as a which is their word, which is correct. There are many suppliers that are happy to show you their independent verifications.
Thank you.
I have a quick question. My one is about like the size of the suppliers. So we work with a supplier that we barely make it in as a customer, and they will only answer our emails if we're literally placing an order with them. And my guess is that they would just never actually, I'm satisfied that they're compliant, but I don't think they'd ever take the time to even read the document. Any suggestions?
I mean, again, I think it's about building up the relationship and trying to have the one-on-one call with people. I think that takes time when you're a small supplier, and it is really hard to get yourself in front of somebody that will actually listen to you. Part of it is, like Emily said, when you are finding these suppliers, trying to make sure at the beginning that they have the certifications in place, or that they have, that they're working to a standard like a RAP or a BSCI, or there's a number of them. And then, so I just think it's going to take perseverance on your part and vetting the supplier, before you started. If you've already started and it's hard to change, it's going to take perseverance to actually get on the phone and speak to them. Yeah. It's good to hear your questions, guys, because it means this is giving us information of what everyone is going to want to know. And so it helps us put together some resources to give to members. So feel free to ask anything, please.
I have a question, Jacinta. I don't know if you can hear me. Say if you have a fabric agent and they have lots of suppliers overseas, so is it up to the agent to actually become a member?
Ultimately, yes.
Yeah,
I would say so. And it's, I guess I see our members' roles as in encouraging those agents, and quite a number of the fabric suppliers are members of Mindful Fashion now. So ultimately, yes, so that they are then working towards the same standards that we're trying to establish with everybody.
Okay, yeah.
Right. And especially if you can't go direct to the mill, right? So you're having to rely on that relationship. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Another question is around, so is how the code of conduct is created, that we make sure that any of our international suppliers are abiding by the laws of their own country, or in some countries there won't be as rigorous, for example, health and safety regulations as there are in New Zealand. So yeah, how do we kind of handle those ones where we want to maybe lift the standard?
The childish and idiotic asides have gone.
Oh, not sure where that came from. So the code is worded in such a way that it will work in international facilities as well as in local facilities. So it's not really directive to New Zealand law. It's more broad, but it does set in place, in particular around health and safety, those quite strict requirements that really the International Labour Organization and the Ethical Trading Initiative have established as being really important in the clothing industry. So those are in the Code of Conduct. Yeah. But otherwise it leaves it relatively open to be meeting the legal minimum requirement in the country of operation. So I'm interested to know if you guys think this is sounds like a positive move, or if anyone's a bit resistant to this, because I think that would be quite useful to hear at this point. Yeah.
So just to say silence is positive.
Yeah, I reckon that's 100% thumbs up.
I think it's really positive, because there's no point having an organization that just says the right things if there's no actual like effort or teeth behind it. So I think full steam ahead.
Is the document going to be shorter than the partnership agreement?
No.
No.
It's basically the standards are very much the same. There might be a few words that have changed, but very much the same. But I think you'll find that's quite standard with a lot of industry codes of conduct.
Will it be translated into Mandarin? Into
Mandarin, yeah.
But not like Vietnamese or anything like that?
We can look at doing that if that's what, if there's enough demand for it. So definitely if you want particular languages, please let us know, because, if there's a few people that want it, we can easily look at it. Yeah.
Jacinta, if a supplier signs up and they have lots of other subcontractors that they need them to sign this code, and they do, but they actually aren't complying, is there any like consequences, or is someone going to check up, or are there consequences that they haven't been completely upfront and truthful in having signed this code?
So that's a really interesting question. The way that we've got it, the level that we've got it at the moment is that the business that adopts the code takes responsibility for it. So if that is a supplier who outsources work to multiple subcontractors, that is that business's responsibility to pass on those standards to their subcontractors and get their subcontractors to sign it. And so they're making that commitment on behalf of their subcontractors that they're working to meet that standard. In the first instance, so developing some sort of complaints mechanism is in our roadmap. We think that that is something that there may be need for, but at the moment we're not entirely resourced to roll out. But that is where I see that fitting, because there needs to be a pathway to a complaint being raised with an organisation other than the member themselves. But at the moment, that is in the roadmap to roll out. Yeah. Has anyone, James or Emily or Greg, want to add to that?
Jacinta, on that one, would we assume though that complaints process, if we've signed up with someone that's outside of New Zealand, a complaint about that stream of our supply chain isn't something that's going to come back into Mindful Fashion through that complaints process?
No, that would be safe to assume that.
So if it's outside of New Zealand and we find someone non-compliant, that's up to us independently to work through that with them rather than pull it back into that complaints process.
Yeah, and that is the wording of the Code of Conduct at the moment.
Yeah. But the point of Mindful Fashion being as an organisation, it's there to help members, and so if there was support needed to work through that non-compliance, then Mindful Fashion would work out how we could help.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, I guess the other point, just on what you were also asking, Reka, is that it's our expectation that members want to be working to this standard. So, you know, if they're not, they really, membership doesn't fit for them, you know, signing the code and being a member doesn't really fit for them. And so, you know, I would really question that fundamental decision on their part as well. So I mean, I know I'm assuming that everybody is honest and trustworthy, but I also think that you've got to start at that level. So yeah. Any other questions?
When are we going to get copies?
So over the next couple of days, if not early next week, we'll send out an email, we'll send a link to the recording, and we'll send out the documents and, you know, just an outline of what we've talked about now and how the process can work. Yeah. But full steam ahead. Okay, I mean, we're only 10 minutes over our 30 minutes. It's pretty good.
Thanks so much. There's lots of work that's gone into it. I think it is a good change, and hopefully, like, once we all wrap our heads around it, we can get back underway with the work that's already started on and getting it out to suppliers and partners.
Yeah. I guess one thing I didn't mention, which I'll quickly say now, is that this idea of sort of mindful fashion being the industry organisation, and we're creating this vision of what we want the industry to become and this set of standards, and then this idea of compliance. There's precedent with other industries where there's these two separate parts of an organisation, or two separate systems that work together. So like the New Zealand Architecture Industry Association does that. They have a code of compliance, and then they also have a sort of an industry watchdog body that monitors that compliance against the code, and that's not the industry association. So I think that's something to keep in mind, is that, you know, the robustness of something is determined by the way that you set up the process as well. Yeah. So anyway, on that note, if no one's got any further questions, I say we can say ka kite.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
There we go.